This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. In this episode of Roots and All, I'm joined by Richard Scott and Polly Moseley from the Scouse Flowerhouse to explore the transformative power of community gardens. They share insights on using wildflowers to create vibrant biodiverse spaces that benefit both people and wildlife, as well as the challenges and rewards of managing community green spaces. Listen on to discover how their work is weaving nature into urban communities.
We established Scouse Flowerhouse as a membership organisation only just over 2 years ago. And the reason we did that is because we wanted it to be a cooperative venture, as it was initially when Landlife set up in 75 in Lark Lane. It was a cooperative venture. So Richard and I worked on it very much together, with me in a production role after the Wildflower Centre closed in 2017. But really, it's beyond us because there are so many sites and community groups and friends of groups with so much expertise and plant knowledge. And every site has its own dynamic. And with the inequalities that exist in the city, you know, there's some sites which have a lot less interest than others. And we deliberately started work mainly in the north end of Liverpool because of this. Well, it's not a perception, it's the truth that investment has been more historically in the leafy suburbs of the south end surrounding the Sefton Park, Princes Park and so forth. Although obviously, you know, it doesn't mean that that's a salubrious area completely at all. But I mean, the thing is that every year has been different. So, for example, in the first year of operation, that was of Scouse Flowerhouse, we paid for mowing of the sites for the second year. And last year we didn't. And the council changed their mowing regime. And one of the things around the meadows is that it's very important that they are mown at the right time, both so that from an aesthetic point of view and so that some of more of the invasives don't seed and so forth. And this is where rewilding, you know, Fergus Garrett, who's one of the best gardeners in the country, featured last week on Monty Don's show, said, we do not do rewilding. We plant the plants that we love. And that's what we're doing. And we're gardening. Obviously, they have an intensive gardening regime with a lot more gardeners. But really what we're doing is we're putting back rare species that have been taken out of the countryside, where the meadows have been vastly depleted since the industrialization of agriculture. And we're putting those back because they're easy to grow on poorer soils, and it makes sense in urban areas to do that rather than to have mown lawns, which are a colonial leftover to sort of demonstrate wealth. That's what lawns kind of are. It's still to do with cricket and everything. And we want to challenge that and put nature closer back to people. Every site is different, and it's completely in our charter and in the way we want to work with co-ownership of sites, so that there's a local group of people who are monitoring the site, who can see when things need to happen and when intervention is needed. And that changes year on year. And ideally, if there's not too many invasive species in the soil, you'd move from an annual meadow to a perennial meadow, and the colours would change, and then that would sustain itself. And so there's an education process that goes with that. But it's the care element that Richard just mentioned that's really, really important. And that demands systemic change in the way that public green space is managed. We've also seen a big depletion in play areas, and we want to make sure that the recreational use of these sites is respected, that there's a good balance. So it's a constant active listening exercise. And at the moment, we haven't got core members of staff to kind of regularly communicate with members and so forth, but we're working towards it. And we've built trust with a lot of the community groups over time. So we probably need to be better at communication, but we really want to build a kind of network of different sites and hubs where we bring together inspiring people to talk about techniques, and people share what's going on in their area at, say, 3-4 meetings a year. We mark the seasons with sowings, with harvests. We share machinery where we can. So we're promoting a sharing economy. But we think the governance structure that we've got in place is right. And we want to be able to evolve that into this better stewardship of the land, really, as a cooperative venture. So we need to activate our membership and really be able to respond to the groups and the individuals who want to be able to play an active role in their local sites.
And in some ways that reflects back to some of the, I suppose, the dreams of the early ecological restoration people. So, for example, considered, I think, the father of ecological restoration in the world, like Professor Bradshaw in Liverpool here was a great champion, but it was in the 1930s in America. There's a famous book, the Sand County Almanac, but it was Aldo Leopold, and he was responding to the Dust Bowl effectively in the sort of Midwest and places. And suddenly, there was this, it was almost like catastrophe, the world's ends, for Oklahoma and places like that. So they were having to deal with that kind of problem. But he talked about a community land ethic, really. And it was interesting that we met people in Cambridge who were part of the sort of Cambridge Federation, Residents Federation, who were, again, sort of thinking about how we should champion the commons and, the public land in ways that we've forgotten about, really. Public parks lost their magic and mystery and have been, sort of depopulated in the amounts of features and the diversity, in terms of what used to be in a public park. It's been dumbed down so much. We forgot what the dreams were for those places, and we have to reimagine them, I think, really. And that is exciting, and it should be about aspirations as much as anything else. But this idea of land ethics, I think, is very important now.
I think that's the thing around co-creation, and I think we've got a way to go. And when you said, is it challenging? It's constantly challenging. We've had very loud voices defending parking, or with very unrealistic concerns around what the meadow might bring in terms of rodents or rabbits or whatever. And they're very loud voices, but it's not democratic, because 80% of the people wanted it on a survey, but the loud voices win out. And we're in this time where things blow up on social media quite quickly, and we're trying to do this change. And Land Life's work does go back to the 70s, and this isn't new, but the economic model that we're working to doesn't fit. So the economic model of contracting maintenance of green space isn't fitting what we would need green space to be for people today. And I've been sort of looking into the economics of it a bit, and I think that if we get this right with the Wildflowers seed as our economy, as a kind of way of sharing it across the cooperative and selling some of it to feed the cooperative to become a better functioning service organization to its members, that we do have something quite unique there that goes beyond pounds and pence, because it's about people's local patch, their will to make it good, and the seed as a currency. And that's something that we're looking to. And I think that there's economists that I listen to, like Mariana Mazzucato, they say we haven't got the model that we need. So we need at the moment creative ways of interacting with us, sharing, doing things, and modeling the way that we want things to be. And that's that kind of, don't shy away from that utopian land ethic that we want people to be able to express and strive for on their local patch.
This is quite interesting, just to jump on that, because this was when we went to Cambridge, we had placards and we put things on cards because we wanted to get points across, because there was 3 of us there. Polly sadly couldn't come. So this was Fergus Garrett's placard, interestingly. So he's got, let's work together, history, in terms of where we all come from and what we got from that, community, charm and atmosphere, dynamic, mouth-watering, colourful, connected, audits, because what's the great thing that's come out of there in recent times has been this amazing biodiversity audit, which once again shatters this myth that gardens, aren't very special. So they told that story in a very special way at Great Dixter now. And nothing's new. I think everybody thinks something's got to be new, but there's always somebody who's done it before. And, we don't claim to be the first to have done anything, because there's always somebody somewhere who's done something similar, and they've just usually been forgotten about. So we should remember that. There's these grain to green stories from, like Sheffield and other places. And it's important that we realize we can make those journeys. There's diversity, knowledge, and what we do with it. But people being thoughtful and also being creative, which is really significant. So that was a really good encapsulation of what we tried to get across. And I think it is about using a different language. So, we've talked about the tortoise beating the hare and the Trojan mouse and all of those things, but it's just making people think it's possible. And it is, that's the genuine truth.
I think it's potentially a slow burn because, I was thinking about when you establish a new site and then straight away I thought, I'm sure schools must go and use those sites. And, it's the children that get inspired and then they go on to look at jobs that are involved in nature. But it is a generational change. And how confident are you that that seed can just grow, that we can kind of establish these things, we can get it going and it will change?
I think it's a generational change, but I think it's right now. The 9, 10, 11-year-olds that we work with on the sowings, they're very knowledgeable about pollinators and stuff in general. They're very enthusiastic. When you do primary school assemblies, the hands are flying up. It's like, obviously kids engage with bugs and nature and always have been excited by that. I mean, not all kids, but they haven't always had screens to take them away from it. But there is a generational change in terms of that knowledge, and that's really important to families. And there's been a skills gap. They're reintroducing natural history GCSE, but there's been a skills gap around botany and so forth about 30 years. But we know a lot of people in the late 20s, early 30s who would want to be doing this work. And there's not been the investment in green jobs that there was in the late 80s and early 90s. So when there was Landlife was a housing co-op, at one point it employed 120 people out of Lark Lane making learning resources. We have those learning resources. They don't have the climate story in them, but they're ready to go back out to schools with a bit of work. And we know that there's people that want to do this work. At the moment, we're not able to offer more than the odd day on specific sites to people, but some people with their own landscape businesses like Paul at Calderstones or Christine in Bootle, Miriam, who works for Urban Planning Design, who brought us in on the design of this park in the North End, the North Docks. I mean, basically, they are people who are making it work for themselves in that area, but it's not that easy for people to see pathways into that employment at the moment. And I think that's what we need to be striving for. And that's what John Little is doing with his national campaign, Care Not Capital, to employ local gardeners in local patches. We don't have anything like we had in terms of skills within the public sector for looking after parks and the plants that used to be looked after in the city, but with a more cooperative approach and a creative kind of way of creating these jobs. There are people who want those jobs. So I would hope that within the sort of next 5 or so years, there would be a step change in this area. It's laid out in things like the local nature recovery strategy that's really recent document, and they've used quite a lot of our photos. People always like using the photos, But I think it is about being bold with the aspirations and setting out a case to our institutional partners. And National Museums Liverpool has a significant estate. There's housing associations with significant estates. There's universities with significant estates. All of these people are moving in this direction. LGMU's just got a biodiversity officer. NML, as National Museums Liverpool, signed up to an agreement with Eden Project to do more in the field. They're really supporting the part of the estate around the World Museum that we're expanding. So it is a slow burn. I totally agree. And I would really hope that there would be these kind of jobs in 20 years, which people can see from the young age that they want to go into. But, Richard came from a background a farming agricultural background where he couldn't see urban ecology as a future, not until he got into university. And if people want to do this work enough, like Josh Stiles, he is a botanist you've probably seen on YouTube. He was a founder member of Scouse Flowerhouse. He's set up his own consultancy, Stiles Ecology. He's a fantastic botanist. He's carved his own way in that and become known throughout the region for what he does. So it is about persistence in that way. There's not the framework or necessarily the mentors that there were in the field, but there are people who have really generous with their time, and we are lucky because of the history in Liverpool to be connected to those people nationally, and we want to share those connections and really find ways to encourage those pathways for future generations and for now, and the people who need the jobs and the housing that keep them well.
Policy, everybody knows that policy is slow. So, the nature recovery strategies are obviously a good thing. The biodiversity action plans in the past were a good thing. But sometimes you do feel like you're swimming through treacle, because it just seems too slow. And I think that's where we have to speed it up, because it's obviously we have to, and I don't think people have got that in a real way. And things, so people are still doing things in very traditional ways, and sometimes making it seem as if it's great, like in planting trees in a very standard way when they could do it in a much more ecological fashion.
But that's changing too, isn't it, Rich? I mean, people are looking at the species of tree in the surrounds as well, more than they were even a few years ago.
It's certainly happening. So, we shouldn't be downcast, but it is how you add these things up together. It's how you add the energies. So, for example, you get divides between the horticultural community or the conservation community, and then there's the wilding community, and they all kind of snipe at each other. Everybody should be holding out their hands, because these are energies. And I think there's real sincerity in the way that people want to join those things up. And so you have to, shake people's hand firmly to do it, rather than be reticent, I think.
Yeah.
It is about doing it and not talking about it, because we're in an age of distraction, aren't we? Where policy can just become an end unto itself rather than actually putting in place the graft. At the British Ecological Society, a policy guy said, we need 5-6 billion and this would be sorted. And it's like, but where are the skills and the people?
Thank you, Richard and Polly, for a thought-provoking interview. And thanks as well to you for listening. If you like this episode, I recommend checking out episode 275, Community Gardening, and 173, Sharing and Borrowing Gardens. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.